though, was that I really didn't feel like I belonged, felt uncomfortable, felt on guard the whole time. As my career advanced, those feelings, diminished. They didn't entirely go away. But now when I look back on my experiences on those cruises through the years, I mostly consider myself fortunate because, as Margaret mentioned, through the years, I have devoted a fair amount of time to mentoring and primarily focused on junior women in my own field in oceanography. And I know from collected stories that there have been a lot of really experiences that I never would have wanted, to go through. And part of the reason I was interested in mentoring was for that reason, to really help protect those who are most vulnerable, out in the field. So over the past 35 years, I do really feel as though there has been progress. And in large part, it's because what Margaret mentioned earlier, there are changing norms. And I think a lot of this has come about because there have been expectations set by universities, expectations set by professional societies. I really am very proud of the fact that AGU has led the way, and expectations also set by funding agencies. Where the work, I think, really needs, or we really need to work on, though, is that those expectations are understood and met by the PIs, by facilities, by universities. I still feel like there is sort of a gap between what we say is expected and what we say is the changing norm by societies, institutes, and funding agencies, and what really happens on the ground. So we really have, I think, a communication issue. Fundamentally, the barriers to creating a safe and inclusive field environment for everyone is that we have a power dynamic, right? I think that power dynamic is not going to go away, but that power dynamic in the field means that those who are the least experienced, often the most junior, mostly but not always women, are the ones who are the most vulnerable. So that's one thing, the power dynamic. The second thing is that we have a culture that protects those people with the power, right? So what can we do about the first in terms of the power dynamic? I think it's very important for us to make sure that anybody going to the field has knowledge, they understand what they're getting into, they have allies, there are processes in order for them, before they go, while they're there, they understand that. So I think it's really important for us to focus on people being prepared. I know as someone who's postdocs and research scientists now continue to go on cruises, I take that very seriously. As a leader, I also take very seriously what we can do about changing the culture. And I think in order to change the culture, there are three things that are needed. One is really accountability. And so we cannot continue to privilege those who do not provide a safe and inclusive work environment. Or really, we could put it the other way. We should privilege those who do provide safe, and inclusive environments. And we also really need to make sure we have a culture where we have open communication channels. I'm sure everybody that's on this in this meeting today has heard stories of people where incidents, harassment, things have happened, and they have not chosen to talk about it, or they haven't revealed it for 7 years later, et cetera. And so that making sure we have safe communication channels where people can ask beforehand about what to expect, report things, is critically important. The final thing I will say, and before I hand this over to Billy, is that I think we really, in order to get these norms to change, we need to really focus on cultural change. And that cultural change really has to do with this holding people accountable, what I mentioned before about privileging those who do create, these environments. And maybe many of you have heard this story about people who sit in traffic and they complain about the traffic, and people always say, well, you are the traffic. And I guess my last message here is that I wanted to say, everybody in this meeting, we are the culture, right? And so we can certainly expect societies, expect university leaders and funding agencies to lead the change, and we should expect them to. But I would just also encourage all of us to think about that we collectively, are the culture and can begin to shift, those norms even more so. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to leave it at that. And right now I'm going to hand it over to Billy.
Susan, do you want to take one quick question before we
Sure.
hand it over? So there's a
Happy to do that.
question that Colleen is sending over that was in the Menti chat. How do you suggest we provide accountability while providing safety for folks who report?
Yeah, I mean, well, the accountability is really what the leaders need to do, right? So whoever is the supervisor, well, Billy will talk about, we have accountability, through AGU, through professional societies, right? But also in my role as Dean of the College of Sciences, I deal with issues like this all the time in terms of making sure, in terms of accountability, people can have resources taken away, or actually like the other side of it, where you privilege people with resources who are working, to create those environments and provide the right mentorship, and leadership in that area. So I would say accountability in particular falls on leaders and societies, and the universities.
Great, then.
Billy, you want to take it over?
Okay, you ready? Okay. All right. I'm going to share a few slides, but first of all, thank you so much, Susan. That was a perfect setup or introduction for some of the more concrete data I will share with the group to put some context around this, and also in terms of some recommendations and what you can expect from AGU. So I will share my screen and okay, I hope you can see this okay.
It's great.
All right, thank you. All right, so what I'm going to do is just talk with you a little bit, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes max or so, about some resources and practices and policies that are in place, and leading up to some recommendations from what's available today for you in this space. So the outline I'm using, first I'm going to give you some demographic information, just put the context not only for AGU, but also for the Biogeosciences section. I think some of this information may be useful in terms of understanding, the population that we're dealing with here. I'll talk a little bit about what's working and what's not, because a lot of times people look to AGU to do some things where we may or may not have authority. So I want you to understand the context for where and when we can act, but I also want you to know where the resources are, not only within AGU, but some other resources that are available as you consider field research practices. And summarizing that in what I'm calling before you go, recommended practices, including not only safety and inclusion, but also research sampling. And then a few items on coming soon. So some things that are in the works that you will see more on later. So some of this may be familiar to most of you, but I'll breeze through the demographics fairly quickly. Approximately 28% of AGU members are students, and for AGU, students mean primarily graduate students. And 32% of AGU members are women scientists. That number with AGU women scientists has been growing. You can see it was only at a little over 15% in the year 2000. Growing steadily now at 32% for AGU membership overall, but it is higher within the Biogeosciences section. The other thing that's important here is to note the percentage of AGU members who reside outside the United States, because that is also a big portion of our population, and it's important even as we consider field research as well. The number I have here is AGU is approaching 40%. Of AGU members are from outside the United States, or non-US residents. But when you look at the first authors for AGU publications, over 50% of first authors within AGU are from outside the not US residents. So that gives you a feel for, as we approach some of these topics, you should make sure we're talking about them also from a global perspective. And here's another snapshot on how we're represented globally in 145 countries. And you can see we have some work to do in certain, what I'm calling the global South. In Africa, South Americas, we're not as well represented. So there's some work that's on the way to help make sure we strengthen our reach and service in those areas as well. And then you see the membership types on the left. So digging a little deeper, looking at BioGeo comparative demographics versus AGU. Well, first of all, the three columns of age. The deepest blue column on the left in each row is in each column is BioGeo primary membership. Let me say off the top, that very first bar is incorrect, where it says close to 50%. BioGeo are women. That correct number, I'm not sure how it, someone being me put the wrong number in, but it's 44.8%. So it's 45% of BioGeo's science membership are women scientists who have primary membership in BioGeo. That second column is BioGeo primary and secondary. So those are AGU members who claim that not only some might claim BioGeo as a secondary membership. And so for that number is 39.2%. When you look, and again, that compares to AGU overall, which is 32%. So you have a higher representation of women scientists in this section than across AGU. When you look at non-US resident scientists, again, for the approximately 40% for AGU overall, but you have you have about 26% to 27% either for BioGeo, 26% for BioGeo primary, 27 for primary and secondary. When you look at student representation, students, AGU membership 32%, and primary bio is about the same, 31.7%. For those claiming secondary, it's a little lower, 23%. And if you combine early student and early career scientists for AGU overall, the number is for AGU overall is 52%. For primary bio is 56%. For total bio is 46.3. So you can see, I think the main message here is AGU Biogeosciences Section has a higher percentage of women scientists and a slightly lower percentage of non-US resident scientists. And this, I think, has some context when we talk about what happens in the field. So before I give you some more information, let me just set the stage that for AGU, we look at our foundations in this area for addressing culture change and ethics and ethical considerations, including issues of harassment. The very foundations of this you can find in our policy statements. And I circle back to highlight the 2017 AGU Scientific Integrity and Professional Ethics Policy, which at the time it was adopted. It was I'm going to say it was groundbreaking because we were the first society to name harassment, bullying, and discrimination as scientific misconduct and have policies and practices in place that allows us to follow up on issues that might arise in the field or other places, which really put us in a position to lead in this area and help influence other organizations to do similar work. We also have a 2018 Diversity and Inclusion Strategic Plan. And most of you are aware that in 2020, we updated the AGU strategic plan. And one of the key elements there is for AGU to be, one of the key goals, AGU to exemplify and promote an inclusive scientific culture. So this permeates everything we do, should be in place in all of our programs, and it provides the foundation for us moving forward. So when we talk about field research, just circling back to what I would call a landmark study by Dr. Kate Clancy. This was published in 2014, where she presented a study of academic field experiences. Now, this was not geoscience, but very close, anthropology. The survey of academic field experiences where when she surveyed with over 500 women scientists, well over half had experienced forms of harassment in the field, either harassing comments. Those over half experienced harassing comments. About a third experienced some unwelcome physical contact. And of that group in 2014, you can see less than 5% were aware of how of a mechanism to report. And going forward to that, even when there were reports, a very, very small fraction were satisfied with the outcomes. So again, this is 2014. A lot has happened since 2014. And I think we now would say in 2014, I would suggest that there were very, very few places that actually had codes of conduct. We've come a long ways because it's one of the main items that we've pushed for and other groups have pushed for. And I think we see these to be in place now. That's not to say that we don't still have harassment in the field, because we still do. But I think with the high interest and the high communications we have around and education around these topics now, we are, I don't want to put this in terms of numbers that are reported, because sometimes numbers that are reported are misleading. But I wanted to highlight with you some things that happen within AGU that we think have worked for us. Again, the ethics policy defining harassment as scientific misconduct gives us some teeth to address cases when they arise. The Safe AGU program, which provides bystander intervention trainings at meetings and implicit bias workshops. The annual ethics summary report to all members, which lets people know that when things are brought forward, actions are taken, and they're taken on a timely basis. So that's a transparency issue. We do have a professional conduct self-disclosure process, which again puts people on alert that misconduct has consequences. And then we also have the Ethics and Equity Resource Center. So I'm saying these are 5 things that have worked, but I also want to highlight for you limitations, because in many cases, individuals might believe that, okay, this person is doing something has harmed me in some way, so AGU is the avenue, the proper avenue to address that. But there are limitations that everyone should realize in terms of what we can and cannot do, where we have authority and where we have means and where we have a reach to have impact. So again, here are the highlights. Highlights expanded the definition of scientific misconduct. I've mentioned it already. So the policy covers misconduct that may harm another AGU member or may bring harm to AGU missions or reputation. Typically, though, this is done in the context of relationship to AGU programming. One key item to note is we do not have a statute of limitation. It's case-by-case consideration. So when issues are brought to our attention, it's always best to report incidents as quickly as you can, getting the detailed information as promptly as possible, because it becomes increasingly difficult the further you go back in time to have the witnesses, to have the proper evidence that can lead to the accountability for the person causing harm. We have had some cases that went back 20 years in time, but in those cases where we were actually able to take action, it was because some very detailed records were kept. And so when you have those detailed records, I'm talking about email messages between 2 parties, then that allows the evidence that you need. And it's rare that you would have those type records going back that far in time. This last point, though, is important, that our policy does not cover misconduct outside of AGU programming. With some caveats on that, we have had people contact us because they were coming to an AGU meeting and there was someone on their campus who had caused some harm, or where there were some actions against that person on campus. It was outside of AGU programming, but the individual wanted us to be aware and wanted to know if there were action we could take. And there are actions we can take. If we have the information, the credible information, we can prevent people from coming to AGU meetings, or we can provide protection for a person when safety protection from the person when they are in meetings. And we've done both. We have prevented people from coming to AGU meetings because of the evidence that was presented that they had caused harm on campus. So in that case, it happened outside of AGU programming, but the connection to AGU program was now I'm coming to the meeting. I'm concerned about being in the same space or same room or same area with this individual. And we are able or have been able to take actions in those cases. A few additional highlights before I talk about specific field safety practices. We typically have 12 to 15 cases per year. Some of these are the traditional scientific misconduct cases, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, but we'll get 5 or 6 personal misconduct cases each year. The details for filing complaints and our process timelines are publicly available. So you should not have to search for these. If you Google ethics at AGU or agu.org and look for ethics policy, go to the bottom of the page, you'll find everything you want to know about complaints, complaint processes, timelines for investigations. That third bullet, confidential process to the extent possible. So we do make every attempt to keep the process or the name of the targets or victims confidential. I say to the extent possible because we don't have complete control over that. In some case, the respondent will go public with actions being brought against them, so we can't control that. But within AGU, these things are handled on a need-to-know basis. So very few individuals are made aware of when cases are being brought, and they're handled through an ethics committee, ethics chair, AGU president, and AGU board of directors when it gets to the point where there's some sanctions required. We also have the ability within AGU to act very quickly within the context of meetings. So if something is happening at a meeting and someone is behaving badly, we don't have to wait a week and do a full investigation. We take actions on the spot. So we can and have expel people from meetings on the spot. We do try to follow up at the meetings to satisfy, to investigate and resolve it to the satisfaction of the person involved, to the target involved. So that's a quick overview of the processes within AGU. Now let me just switch over to field safety resource, some resources and recommendations. I really just have 3 items to highlight for you. First of all, the National Science Foundation does have resources. They do have consequences for PIs if you take advantage of reporting into them. There is an NSF field vessel safety working group in place, and NSF has also funded or sponsored some recent workshops looking at field safety, and I'll highlight one of those in a few minutes. I also want to mention that the Advanced Geo group has a lot of workshops and resources that can apply directly to what you need to do and know concerning field safety. It has anti-harassment and bystander intervention training. And this group is, it's rare to see a group that's so active and so committed. This group has done some amazing work and they continue to do amazing work. So if you have interest in getting more details, I would say Erica Marie Smeralta is the lead PI on that. Becca Bonds is on this call, so I think there are others here who can speak to what's happening with Advanced Geo. It's amazing work that's going on there. And then the AGU Ethics and Equity Center, it's really a repository for leading practices, and there are a few leading practices that are highlighted within the center as a resource for resource documents. One is the University of Washington field report on equity in fieldwork committee report, preventing harassment in fieldwork situations. That's one item I will highlight. The other item is one that's not used very often, but it's there and it has been used and it is used. We do offer free problem-solving consultation with an attorney. And that problem-solving consultation is designed such that it could lead to litigation, but if it does lead to litigation, that attorney would not be the person representing you. This person is there to walk through options with anyone who feels that they are a target of harassment or victim. But it is designed for, the limitation here is for student or early career members only. So it's a free resource, and it has come in, I think the biggest use, one of the biggest advantages for people to know that they're not alone. Because sometimes you're dealing with situations like this, you can feel like it's you against the world and people don't know or what you're going through or experiencing. And in this case, when we refer people over, then we step out of the middle of it. We don't know how it's resolved. We don't get a report back or the resolution. We make the connection and we step away and we pay the bill. So we talked about field research challenges. And so in 2018, the National Academy of Sciences report on sexual harassment of women in academic STEM talked about an ability to actually predict situations in which harassment was likely to occur. And that prediction talked about a male hierarchical situation, a male-dominated group without reporting mechanism, little transparency. So that's the report talked about if you saw a structure like that, you could reasonably predict if you did a work climate survey, you'd find incidents of harassment higher than norm, higher than other groups. But when you think about field research, it's almost ideally set up for harassment to occur. Field research usually occurs in isolated or physically remote locations where you're there, you can't leave. You're talking about ideal for harassment. Sometimes usually confined physical areas, sometimes shared sleeping areas, intensified personal interactions, potentially taxing working conditions, sometimes physically demanding, limited opportunities for relaxations, limited communications. If you're out in a remote area and can't communicate back, you're in a tough situation. Susan talked about hierarchy. Potentially you would be in a structure that you have you walked into this hierarchical structure because you don't control that structure. It may be on a ship, it may be someplace where the structure is already in place and you just insert yourself into it. And also the big thing that we all know and have experienced is that this perception that the on-campus norms don't apply when you're in the field. And I think that has led to a lot of what people were experiencing up until recent years in terms of field research experiences being places where a lot of harassment occurred. Not to say it did not occur other places, but it was ripe for harassment. Again, these were situations, I would say 5 years ago, this was the norm. There were very few organizations that had codes of conduct and expectations before you go into the field. That has changed now, just through the educational processes, through places like Advanced Geo, AGU, and others, that there's been a lot of attention given to correcting this. So what I put together just from scouring a lot of resources and other workshops that I'm familiar with, what I've just extracted, not to say this is the Bible or anything, but I'm suggesting here's 7 considerations, 7 items before you go. Standardize and communicate expectations with all involved. Be clear on the norms for off-campus behavior for everyone. Establish clarity on reporting and follow-up systems. Let people know if something happens, this is how you report, this is where you report, this is what's going to happen in follow-up. This 4th item, I say consider anonymous disclosure options. We don't accept anonymous. We don't act on anonymous reports to AGU, but in some cases, it might be appropriate to have ability. I think you want to know what's happening in any research environment. Consider the buddy scheme for informal peer mentoring. The next to the last item is proactively address inclusive needs and potential individual impact. So when you think about people who are going in the field, it may be the first time, they might be a person of color going into an environment where it's hostile traditionally. It might be a person with some inability, physical inability. So just make sure for your entire group that's going that you proactively consider the individual needs of the people within your party, and you have discussions with them, and you take actions to proactively address any concerns or issues in advance. And the last thing is just develop, there are plenty of checklists out there, have a best practice checklist to include debriefing. So don't just send to the field and say, oh, everything went fine. Make sure there's some debriefings that follow from that. There was a 2021 workshop to promote field safety in field sciences, and this was sponsored through the Consortium for Oceans Leadership. This workshop was sponsored by a National Science Foundation. This was part 1. I think there's a part 2 coming for this workshop. It's coming in May of this year. If any of you are interested, you can see the people, the names up above for those who plan this. If you go to the website for the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, you'll find this report, and you can also find information about maybe participating in the follow-up workshop, which is May of this year. But here are the outcome recommendations from that 2021 report. And again, it might not, this lists some things that should be done, doesn't get into the details on how it's done or other needed details, but it mimics some of the things I just talked about. Establish expectations for continued assessment and evaluation of fieldwork conditions by meeting with participants before, during, and after the work. Demonstrate a commitment to preventing and responding to our reports. Hold PIs and institutions, university leaders are accountable for creating equitable and inclusive work environments. And that was one of the items I think Susan highlighted in the beginning. How do you have that accountability? Reconceptualize harassment as a health and safety issue. And the last item is produce a pre-expedition checklist. So that's that checklist I talked about, designed for harassment prevention and response planning. So there's more to come on this, but if you, that report is an extensive report. I think it's close to 100 pages. That workshop had, I believe, over close to 50 recommendations, but these were the top 5. So what can you expect from AGU? You can and should expect proactive field research education to address anti-harassment, safety, and ethical sampling issues. You can expect prompt follow-through on misconduct complaints, a transparent reporting process and timeline. So in that middle item, this is not to say that everybody is going to be satisfied with every finding or once the complaint is made, what happens, but you will get clear answers. It will be prompt. It will not be stretched out. But we do try to follow up and resolve things to the satisfaction of the target. Sometimes the answer is, we have no authority in that arena. We will refer you back to your Title IX office or other offices. And in some cases, we have actually talked to Title IX officers, although they're not obligated to talk to us. But we encourage people at institutions outside the AGU to do the right thing. And you can expect AGU to have continued proactive work towards safe and inclusive culture, free from gender harassment. I'm going to close with one final thing, which is not safety per se, but there's also an ethics in field research and sampling working group that's underway, and that's joint with the Geological Society of America, and is co-sponsored by AGU's, one of the AGU sections as well. So that group is proposing to have a position statement to be adopted by both AGU and GSA. I believe you'll see this, the outcome of this will be more than about sampling. We'll likely talk about safety as well. Web page with references, verbiage for funding agencies. So these are things that the working group has hypothesized as their desired outcomes, including some more around curriculum development. And this evolved out of some ethical practices, unethical sampling practices in the field. So in close, just watch for additional educational resources from AGU, and each of us can make a difference. And as Margaret said, as she opened up, you can also call me or contact me directly, and I will respond. Thank you.
Hey, Margaret.
Yes, Susan.
Yeah, thank you, Billy. There's a lot of information there. If you don't mind, given the time we have left, I thought I would pick up on a couple questions that were in the chat. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank
there
you.
seemed to be two threads. One is, I appreciate, Billy, that you put up those 7 steps to do before you go. When I look at those, though, I think those are really the responsibility of the individual that's leading the field work, right? Not necessarily what we would think somebody who is a junior member of the group is going to do. So I just wanted to speak to that because they're not in a position to set the expectations.
Correct.
And that's where I think what it's really important for someone that is going, into the field for the first time, or maybe even, even more experienced, but still feels very vulnerable. One is to really, I know this is going to sound a little odd, but in some ways you have to expose your vulnerability to somebody that you can really trust, right? Because you have to reach out and get a mentor, get allies, and really find out what you can expect. And I think that's really important. Actually, I encourage everybody always. I'm just a big fan, of mentors and allies. And I think it's particularly important for those who go into the field, right? And so I would say all of us who are in leadership capacities or PIs should make sure that every junior person going into the field understands that they should have a network of mentors, peer mentors. They should know what to expect, et cetera. So it's really, there may be a different set of steps for people who are in that position, but certainly those who are leading the field work should definitely follow those steps. The other thing that was prominent in the chat was that a number of people were saying, well, not everything maybe rises to the level of an incident. And as Billy knows this, I know this in working with AGU and also in the university here, there is a lot of gray area, but that's also where it's very important to have mentors, people you can talk to, and also important to reach out to ombuds. Now, Billy provides that role at AGU, but almost every university and other working places have ombuds where they can essentially be a filter. So I think it's really important for you to be able to know early on who those resources are that you can go to. I will say, when I went out 35 years ago, there was no way I would have admitted that I didn't know what to expect when I was going on, to that, I think it was a 4.5 week, cruise, because I wanted to, appear as though I knew exactly, what to expect and what I was doing. So it's a little difficult because we sort of have this image of who's doing the field work, who's out at sea, who's out in the field, like Margaret talked about. But we kind of have to break that mold and admit our vulnerabilities, and sometimes, ask for information and ask for help. So just wanted to put that out there in response to some things that were coming in the chat.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to suggest now, even though there's a lot of important questions that we'll want the answers to, but that we'll stop recording now. And I'm going to stop recording